All right. Just a quick question for the chat, Julio. Is it limited?
I'm starting.
Okay.
No, it's just someone has Facebook open. That was
That
my
was
comment.
me. That was me.
Oh.
I closed it. So for the chat function, is it just among the panelists?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Cindy, just before you start the meeting, Natasha needs to call roll.
Would you like to do that now, or shall we wait a minute or two?
It's we could wait maybe a
Yeah,
moment.
I'd say wait. Why not wait until 5 after? Give people a chance to come in.
Yep.
Okay, great.
So Jeremy, for the board members who are here tonight that are not on the committee, they could send me a private message that they're here so I can count their attendance.
They could do that. Or we could send them a private message telling them we've counted their attendance.
Okay.
Both ways. One of us will beat the other.
Okay. Jeremy, you made me a co-host?
Oh, I think I have to do that again. I'll do that right now. I have 5 after now. Cindy, if you'd like to start.
Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ability and Access meeting today. We are going to have a presentation with NYC Restrooms for All to discuss a public restroom access in New York City. And then the second item on the agenda will be to discuss our priorities as a committee for this year, since it's been a while since we've last met. But before we get started, I wanted to, well, first let's take attendance if that's what we need to do. So Natasha, would you like to take that away?
Sure. Cesar Zuniga. Cynthia Vandenbosch.
Here.
Jose Alaman. David Estrada. Beverly Kleiman. Beverly,
She
I'm
didn't unmute, but she waved at you.
okay.
Present.
Okay, thank you. Christina Lem. Jimmy Lee. Julio Pena III.
Here.
Thank you. Karen Rolnick.
Here.
Brian Slater. And I see John Johnston. Are you here, John?
I'm here.
Thank you. And Cynthia Felix.
Present. Thank you.
Thank you. That's
Natasha, also Nick Azadian
oh, I didn't see
I'm
Nick.
here.
Sorry, Nick. Hi,
and
Nick.
Pat Ruiz.
Hey, Pat. Okay. I got you down.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Natasha. So just before we get the meeting started in earnest, I wanted to walk through, some of you might have seen these slides as you were tuning in, but I just want to walk through some guidelines and procedures. So first, if you have any technical problems, please let us know. You can let us know in the Q&A actually, or you can also let us know at by emailing bk07@cb.nyc.gov. And our community board staff will be checking that regularly. Also, as you can see on the screen, it says, please mute yourself. So I believe we have someone who's not muted who needs to, there we go. So please mute yourself when you're not speaking. If you are one of the panelists, and so just make sure that you're muted when you're not speaking. When I call on you, then you can unmute yourself. If you can't unmute yourself, the host will do that. And then this says board members who wish to ask a question or speak may use the raise hand function. But it looks like we'll do the same thing for everyone who's also attending. So if you're attending and you're on Zoom and you have a question or you wish to speak, please just select the raise hand function. And when it's your chance to speak, we will unmute you and you'll have the opportunity to speak. We will be attempting to limit comments and questions to 3 minutes as we go along. And if you're joining the meeting by phone, I just want to let everyone know that you can use the raise hand function by pressing *9. And then last but not least, please do remember to lower your hand after you finish speaking. So again, please let us know if you have any issues. I also just want to point out that in the attendee controls, you can see that there's a Q&A function. Feel free to go ahead and select the Q&A function if you have a question or comment that you would like to be shared out. And again, you can see on the screen where the raise hand function is located. So now that we're pretty much, I guess, on the same page, I'm going to stop my screen share.
Cindy, let me just tell Natasha to please add David Estrada. And I saw one other, and Victor Swinton as well to attendance. And I see Cynthia Gonzalez has joined us as well.
So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And again, this committee, for those who may not be familiar with the Ability and Access Committee, addresses issues that relate to people with disabilities. And we want to make our district as inclusive as possible. Inclusion for everyone and having a more socially inclusive place includes access to public restrooms. And so that's the focus and topic for the first presentation today. We are joined by Maeve Flaherty, who is the founder and president of NYC Restrooms for All. And she's going to kick things off for us today with a presentation about this project and hopefully to get some feedback from us. So Maeve, thank you so much for joining us and feel free to take it away.
Great, thanks so much, Cindy. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now so that all of you can see my presentation. Can everyone see that fine? Yep, okay. So I'm Maeve, as Cindy said, and I'm the president and founder of New York City Restrooms for All, which is a student-led coalition advocating for increased access to public restrooms. So in 1940, this is a quick overview of kind of the picture of how public restroom access has changed over the past almost 100 years. And we used to have way better access to public bathrooms. In 1940, there were public toilets in every single subway station, which at the time was over 1,600. And there were bathrooms in all 1,500 parks. And that was just the bathrooms in subway stations and in parks. There were also a variety of other public bathrooms available. Today, there are toilets in approximately 70 subway stations, although that number even is in flux because many stations that claim to have bathrooms, in fact, are locked, or they're just too unsafe, or they're inexplicably closed. So as you all know, I'm sure, subway stations are not dependable for bathrooms. And the same is true for parks. You guys are near Prospect Park. There are some bathrooms in Prospect Park, but unreliable ones. And often, even in parks that claim to have bathrooms, those bathrooms are closed seasonally or closed after 8 p.m. And so in general, it's incredibly difficult to access public bathroom in New York City. So overall, there's about 1,100 public bathrooms in New York City for a city of 8.6 million. And if you compare that to Singapore, Singapore has 30,000 public bathrooms for 6 million residents. So completely different landscape. So there are approximately 300 Starbucks in New York City. As I'm sure many of you have experienced, generally, like, people will often consider Starbucks the public bathroom of New York City. There's a very common dependency that we have on private businesses to provide a public lack. And Starbucks really is one of the main organizations that fills that lack. But unfortunately, as the COVID-19 pandemic showed, we can't depend on private bathrooms. Starbucks closed their bathrooms for months, and they had every legal right to do so. And in the time that they did that, we saw a massive increase, anecdotally, not statistics for this yet, but a significant increase in public urination and in people just expressing their inability to go to the bathroom. So it's never a good idea to depend on private businesses. And what's also important to note is that this is an equity issue. When you depend on a private business, that business will be concentrated where they feel they have the best consumer reach. And so Starbucks is concentrated in wealthy areas of Manhattan and Brooklyn. And if you look at this map, it shows you just where the general locations of Starbucks are. And there are other businesses too, Shake Shack, look, this is more of an example, but what it does show, and what I'm sure you guys have experienced, is that when you leave these central tourist districts, there aren't really toilets. And because those wealthy areas have so many businesses, there's been less of an impetus to change this problem. So this is a real issue for sanitation and health. So your public urination has been decriminalized, but back when it was a criminal issue, the New York Police Department issued 20,000 summonses approximately in the average year. And so we don't have those numbers anymore, but that is a lot of public urination. And that contributes to a lack of hand washing, because if you're urinating publicly, you're not washing your hands, which is really bad for disease. So in 2018, there was an outbreak of hepatitis A in San Diego, which led to 20 deaths. And the local San Diego public health officials and many analysts linked that directly to the fact that San Diego had a complete lack of public toilets and therefore hand washing facilities. So we already know that there's a very clear connection between health and access to public bathrooms. And yet we've also seen this year is that in a moment of health crisis is often when you suddenly find that you don't have enough public toilets. So this impacts a wide variety of New York City residents, parents with small children, of which there's about 1.7 million children in New York, pregnant and menstruating people, the homeless, we have a population of about 57,000, the elderly, which is a population of 1.2 million, and that's growing. It's been increasing in the hundreds of thousands. And then the incontinent, which is we don't have numbers for New York specifically, but your average population has anywhere from 10% to 36% of the population being incontinent. And then tourists who are stuck and don't know where to go. So as you can see, this is not an issue that impacts a small amount of the city. This one impacts a wide variety of people, and even people who aren't on that list. I'm not on any of those lists, and I started this project because I had a day where I really had to go to the bathroom and I could not find a bathroom, and it pissed me off so much. I was very annoyed. And I'm sure all of you have your own stories of not being able to find a bathroom, and you understand how frustrating that is, and also how physically painful and disconcerting of an experience it can be. So my proposal is a public-private bathroom partnership. So what that essentially is where the New York City government pays small local businesses to open their bathrooms to the public for free and to advertise those bathrooms with stickers on their windows and doors. And what this does is it rapidly increases the availability of public bathrooms. One of the major problems that we have had historically in increasing public bathrooms is attempting to do so in a manner that requires immense infrastructural investment. So, for example, Mayor Bloomberg was really into public bathrooms. It was actually a cause that he was excited about coming in. And he purchased 15 APTs, which are automated public toilets. And there is one near Prospect Park. And these APTs are like standalone. You just install them in place and then you can use them, and they are handicap accessible. However, it is really hard to get those installed. They require an immense amount of like working through bureaucracy. There's a lot of style issues, like do they fit with the character of the neighborhood? There's often like regulations around that. Having enough sidewalk space, hooking up to pipes, it's a mess. And so Bloomberg ordered 15 toilets, and 15 toilets arrived in New York, and this is about 20 years ago. And in that time, only 5 have been installed. Or no, maybe never mind, wait. 10 have been installed and 5 haven't. So it's a clear waste of city money that we have these toilets just sitting in a warehouse. And going that route has clearly not worked and is not going to work in the future. So trying to fix this by building new park toilets or putting in automated toilets or any of those just is not feasible with the financial constraints and the infrastructural constraints that has. So this model is based on successful toilet models elsewhere. So one of them is called Nette Toilette, and this is really popular in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, like kind of the Germanic area of Europe. And it's a private business, the Nette business, and they're paid by local governments to facilitate and organize the management of these public toilets. And so what happens is that member cities just join in, they pay a flat fee, and that flat fee is distributed to local businesses, which then open their bathrooms to the public. And they have a whole map and like you show you where you can get them. It's an app, all of that. So the city of Bremen in Germany has the lowest, has the lowest resident to public bathroom ratio in Germany. And it pays about 150,000 euros a year for a system that it estimates would have cost 1.1 million euros if run by the government. And those costs are reduced by the fact that what the city is paying for is cleaning, because the people who run the business clean their own bathrooms, and security, because people who run the business are obviously overseeing their own premises. And so it massively reduces the actual running costs of a public toilet, which in this day and age, if you just have a public toilet in a park, it has to be cleaned. It has to be reviewed by cops. It has to be, there's a lot of levels of security and cleanliness costs associated, and a public-private model gets rid of those issues. It just kind of cuts it out for the city. So that was the privately run model. The publicly run model is the London Community Toilet Scheme. So the City of London, and specifically, this is actually more like a borough. It's basically the borough of it's like FIDI in London. But so the City of London pays local businesses to open bathrooms, and this is run by the city government. So it's on their website. If you go to like, you can find the map. All of that stuff is run through the government. There's no private involvement outside of the actual participating businesses. And of those businesses, they have a 90% retention rate. So businesses actually like being a part of this because it offers them with a reliable monthly fee that they can then use for their own purposes. It's a very simple way to support local businesses and also open the existing bathrooms to the public. So this first kind of showing you how effective this can be. This is a map of the City of London. And if you look at all of for the red toilets, there's like one near the river, kind of one near the edge of the borough. Like there's a few, like 3 or 4 in there. Those are all the ones that are like the APTs, the automated public toilets, or are the they're like, or they're just like built into the infrastructure, and they're great. I actually study abroad in London. I've used several of those because I do a lot of toilet tourism. And but then what you have more of is all of these blue toilets are local businesses that are on the community toilet map and that have opened their bathrooms to the public. And as you can see, that has massively increased the like known public bathrooms that are available by a really major amount. Like just looking at that map, it really shows you how rapidly and how easily they've increased public toilet access and the extent to which it is so much more effective to pay businesses to open their bathrooms than it is to actually have your own. So what we do, Nursery Restrooms for All, is that as you've experienced, we approach and meet with council members and their staffs, and we present at community boards. So we built some relationships with like 3 or 4 community board, I think 3, 3 council members, and we're presenting at community boards over the course of these next few months. And what we're trying to do is gather letters of support from each community board that we present to, and use that as we continue working with council members. And it's been very successful in terms of popularity. Like there's been no one we've spoken to who's been like, I don't like this. In fact, like we actually have a couple of people, like, and Councilmember Reynoso's staff is very enthusiastic about bathrooms, it's one of his things. So we do have kind of like a successful trajectory, but the problem with public bathrooms is that it's hard to demonstrate intense community support simply because people don't realize that something better is available, or that it's an option. In New York City, people haven't protested the lack of bathrooms despite how visceral of an issue it is and how major, because they haven't really thought that there could be something different. So thank you for listening to me. And yeah, what we're looking for is just an expression of support if that's something you feel comfortable with. And I would be happy to take any questions, comments, concerns. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maeve. If you could, before we start taking questions and comments, can you provide us with a little bit more context on how you came to work on this project, who has been involved, just so we have a little bit more of that background?
Absolutely. So my little anecdotal starting point was that I was in Harlem and I had a paper due the next day for a public policy organization. And I had no idea what I was going to write about. And I desperately had to pee that day and I couldn't find a toilet. And I was so angry and I went home and I wrote this policy piece. And I was required to write it for the organization I was in sorry, I'm going to speak slower. I have a tendency to go a little fast. I was required to write this paper to like submit to a magazine. And I didn't think I was going to get it. I just had to do it to be part of the board of this thing. And so I submitted it, and about 4 months later, I was accepted to be published in this national journal. And through that, I received a fellowship from the Roosevelt Institute, which is a progressive think tank that's located in Midtown. And they work on a lot of progressive issues. They're connected with the FDR Presidential Library. And while I was working there, I got to know people across the country involved in public restroom access and availability. So we're supported by Flush, which is out in Portland, but that's actually the largest national public bathroom advocacy group. And then I work closely with, that's Flush with PH. I work very closely with the woman, Kim Walsh, who is a professor at NYU, and she runs Flush with an F. And that Flush is also very involved. And then there's just a variety. I'm not going to name check every public bathroom group in New York. Well, we're the only public bathroom group, but there's like a poop art organization. There's a surprisingly vibrant community of people who care about public bathrooms. And so I do work with all of them, but primarily it's with just fellow students. We've had people at NYU, Government Community College, CUNY, and we basically just approach community boards and council members and have been advocating for this, but we've been very lucky to have support. Oh, I just don't know how I completely missed that our major thing this fall has been that we've been selected as United Nations Millennium Fellows. So we've had support from the UN, and they've, over the course of this project, they've kind of helped us learn more about how to run a campaign. And yeah, so about 12 of us were UN Millennium Fellows this fall, and that was very exciting.
Great. Thank you so much. And the end goal for you right now, at least, is, or not the end goal, but the goal is to get a letter of support from the community board. And for what purpose? So then you want to take this to city council members
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and what is
To
your
have,
sort
it,
of
to
hope?
have funding included in the budget for it. That's essentially the long-term goal, is to get funding in the budget to fund at least a pilot program of this and see how it goes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you for your presentation and for taking the time to come speak with us. And I see that Cynthia Gonzalez, she raised her hand, and then we have on deck Nick Azadian.
Do I call or?
Nope,
No,
I'll
we'll take care of that,
facilitate.
Mick.
Mhm.
Cynthia, you have to unmute yourself.
Okay. All right. You know, you started this presentation by stating that, you know, the difference between Singapore and how we're dealing here and in other, you know, places in Europe or what have you. Now, do you have any clue, any idea of how our homeless situation compares to these places that you've mentioned, and how our opioid epidemic, and I'm going to say it's an epidemic, you know, especially in South Brooklyn, you know, because our community, you're talking about communities. I saw those little blue things that you said, and those are communities. But our communities have been devastated by homeless issues and opioid issues. And back in the day, I remember as a senior citizen when all of the bathrooms were open in the subway. But what happens? People were victimized in the subways. They were raped. They were, you know, there was a lot of crime. There's a lot of crime in New York City right now where people are being pushed into subways and all of this. So, you know, we're in a situation where, you know, is it even safe to go into a bathroom in the subway? Because I'll tell you what, I would rather use a Depends than put my life on the line going into a bathroom, you know, that I don't feel safe in. Because, and also, you know, like I'm a member of the Floyd Bennett Garden Association. And there have been times when we have had events and there's porta potties and stuff like that. And I see them all over the city where there's a construction site, you know, and stuff like that. The question is, first of all, business owners have closed their bathrooms because the homeless have camped in there. They've shot up drugs and overdosed in them. So, you know, like, I'm not sure, like, how safe, or, you know, how do we deal with that? Because providing an infrastructure is one thing, but the most important thing, which then becomes, I guess, the responsibility of the business owner, is how do you provide safety for people that are going in there? Like, if I was to walk in there as a senior citizen, I don't think that anybody in McDonald's or whatever would object to that. But if I was an IV drug user and I go in there and I never come out of there, you understand? These are the problems that we face in the inner city and in a lot of places where they have been forced to refuse access to people, even if they're patrons. Now, we have what, 15 homeless shelters in our district here, or probably even more. And these people, they don't have a place to live because they, you know, sometimes they're put out of where they are and they can't go back until a certain time. They don't have anywhere to go. And they'll go into one of these bathrooms and they'll be in there for like hours and stuff. So these are the problems that I want to know how your organization is going to deal with the businesses that have to have these problems, because it all ultimately falls on the business. And that's why the businesses won't open their bathrooms to people, especially now during a pandemic, you know, because
Exactly.
who's gonna police the bathroom in the business?
So thank you, Cynthia. So Maeve, have you been looking into this question and this issue, and do you have a response to Cynthia's concerns?
Yeah, absolutely. That is, I think, the primary concern with this, and is absolutely a very complicated issue that has been dealt with in different ways with different organizations. As I said, the Neta Toileta system is in 210 cities. There is a wide variety of how that's kind of worked out. And I think what it is true is this model of public bathroom access does depend on the business wanting to do it and have it taking on that risk of having to deal with potentially having a drug user or some situation happening in their bathroom. And the reality is that the only real thing they can do is call the police. What it allows for is it just simply makes it more effective than having the like if you have a normal standalone toilet in a park, the police aren't checking that all the time. There's nobody watching. So people feel enabled to go and do that. People feel less comfortable walking into like a local diner or something and then staying in the bathroom for that long. And then if they do, people can call the police. But yeah, it is the issue. It becomes kind of a free market thing of how much do we pay businesses to make them willing to take on this extra burden? And to a certain extent, what it ends up doing is a lot of businesses are already taking on this burden. So it will allow them, like local businesses, to kind of get money for that. But it's not a simple answer. One of the things about it as well is that it's temporary. So you can sign on to it, do it for 2 or 3 months, find that you don't like it, and then stop working or stop participating. It's very much a very flexible.
But right now during the pandemic, most of the businesses are like delivery or takeout only. And when you go in there to order something, they're not gonna let you use their bathroom. It's not like back in the day, if you had a situation like the one that you described, you know, the most friendliest places to go to was a local bar. You buy a soda, so you're contributing something to the organization just to use the toilet.
Yeah, so that is so for stuff. Read the pandemic. This already this won't even approach the budget for at least a year. So when I was actually talking about this with council members, staffs, they weren't even framing it in the context of the pandemic. So what you need in a pandemic is obviously very different than what you need in a not in a pandemic. But in terms of just establishing and trying out this model and kind of testing it, it would not be occurring during the COVID-19 pandemic. So I don't necessarily have an answer. It's just the scale, the timeline is too far forward. So I don't.
But my initial question was, in these places such as Singapore and London and the places that you mentioned, I mean, is the crime rate and the homeless rate and the homeless rate like we have here in our local community? Because I love the idea. I will support the idea. I'll write a personal letter endorsing the idea. However, you know, the safety of the people in the community is what is going to be called to question.
Yeah, that's absolutely a real concern. I will. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I hate to interrupt, but we have several people kind of waiting. And I think this point that Cynthia is raising is an important one to be thinking about and considering. Nick Azadian has been waiting. And just a reminder, everyone, we're going to have 3 minutes for each speaker. So Nick, if you have a question or comment.
A little of both. I'll try to be brief. So I guess my first question, first, Maeve, that was a very nice presentation. I'm sure you've done a lot of research to put that together, and we certainly appreciate you bringing it to the board. I do have a couple of very brief questions. The first one is in these European cities where they rolled this out, it appears that they're rolling it out in more of the glitzier and or higher end districts primarily, and you're not really seeing this in areas like Croton or Brent or some other parts of London where you probably wouldn't visit as a vacationer. Not to say that Sunset Park isn't a vacation spot, but you know, we don't exactly fall into the financial district or Midtown Manhattan. So, you know, rollout, you know, specific to the concerns that Cynthia just brought up, you know, would be a concern for a lot of the local businesses. So I guess my question is do you know roughly how much money was being paid to those business owners to participate in that? And then the second thing I would like to bring up is do those funds also cover maintenance expenses? You know, my background as an engineer, I've been called into many buildings in Manhattan and Brooklyn to fix plumbing systems where all manner of things, which I'm not going to get into, eventually end up there. And those things largely revolve around a lot of the items that Cynthia had just mentioned. And they can cost sometimes up to thousands of dollars to remediate. So that is something else to consider. So I guess with that is, you know, do you know how much money was being contributed to the business owners for this program?
Yeah, so I do not have the answer for that, and not for lack of trying. I've had engaged discussions back and forth with the City of London organization and with Ned Toiletta. They don't really give me, it's very much, they deal with it with the individual town and city. And so it is in that regard, like kind of market rate to like what price will people be willing to pay, and then they kind of work from there. Those are all extremely valid concerns. Again, this is not I don't believe this to be a perfect system. One of the things that like kind of my mentor and who's a public bathroom advocate has kind of talked to me about a lot is that there is no perfect public bathroom system. It's a matter of throwing things at the wall and seeing if any of them stick.
As one suggestion,
Mhm.
the other way to look at it is trying to figure out what is the Parks Department's budget for maintaining and building new infrastructure, and then pretty much positioning the reallocation of resources for something like this. Now, I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent, but that would be one way to try to address the financial impact of this, especially with a city that is, well, short of cash.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I appreciate that. And just returning quickly to your previous one about the maintenance costs, the way it works in these other cities is that they're paying you the flat fee, and then that's kind of it. And I don't personally know what kind of problems, like, again, it's not a very they're not very public with these issues and how they've interacted with that. So I simply don't have an answer to that question, but I agree that it's a concern.
So thank you, Nick. Does that?
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, great. So next up is Karen Wolnick, and then we're going to hear from Gladys Bruno after that, followed by David Estrada. So Karen?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is indeed something that is sorely needed in New York City. I do a lot of cycling. I have endured 3 pregnancies, and I can tell you this is really badly needed. I just want to make, you know, as Cynthia was asking her questions, the question of shelters and homeless people came up, and I just want to point out a few things that, yes, there are 12 shelters or so even in this neighborhood now, but shelter residents have access to bathrooms. Shelters have bathrooms, and they're permitted to use them during the day. No one is prevented from going into the shelter and using those bathrooms during the day. There are also mobile showers that the DHS provides for known homeless areas that provide showers and bathrooms. But you and I wouldn't want to use those. In my experience with bicycling is that businesses are happy to let you use their bathrooms so long as you mask up. And, you know, so there's that. This being the accessibility committee, though, I do want to point out that most of the bathrooms within businesses are not accessible, the vast majority. So I was wondering if maybe in the payment system, could there be a several tiered system in that if you have accessible bathrooms and you open them up to the public, you could get maybe a little more money for that. That's just a thought. And also this could be a benefit to vendors in the same way that selling lottery tickets is a benefit for vendors. It brings people into their stores, and maybe you pick up a candy bar or a cup of coffee on your way out. And That's it. That's all I got.
Yeah, that was a lot of great comments. Thank you. So first off, the vendors thing is actually a big theme of a lot of these organizations, is that a lot of businesses like that because it brings people in. But I think I definitely, God, I just somehow lost my train of thought. Sorry, wait, can you just run through those comments? Couple of they were a little separate, so I kind of got a little mixed up.
Yeah, I mean, I just talked about homeless shelter residents have access to
Yeah.
toilets. That businesses are allowed, happy to let you in if you
Oh,
wear.
it was the accessibility thing. That's that
And the accessibility
yeah.
issue, yeah.
So first off, I think that is a great idea to do it in tiers. I've never thought about that. I think that's a great idea because that is actually one of the issues that I have run into while discussing this and kind of thinking about this, is that there are obviously so many different types of access issues and disability issues, and that one of the things, so again, my mentor, Carol, who's the woman from Flush in Portland, her husband is physically disabled and he can't access non-accessible bathrooms. And she said it's been really difficult for her because she doesn't really feel like it's appropriate to say no to projects that are not ADA appropriate simply because that restricts the public bathroom access for the incontinent, and that she wants to find a model where you're encouraging and facilitating bathrooms to become ADA compliant, but that in a project like this, you have to be able to also use ones that aren't ADA compliant, or else you simply won't be able to increase the numbers. And so that's a really thorny issue that I agree. I don't know how it would work to have government paying a business to provide something that's not ADA compliant. Like there's a lot of complications in that. And I do love that idea of tiered bathrooms, but I certainly also think that incontinence is a very real public bathroom issue, like is a really very real disability. And that that has its own unique challenges, which don't necessarily align with ADA compliancy. So.
Thank you, Maeve. Gladys has a comment or question, and then David Estrada is on deck.
Yeah, hi, hello. Yes, it's a great presentation, and I can relate. I've used the fact that I'm pregnant, never was, but just to be able to use a bathroom, to be able to use it, they would let me go in, you know, but I had to be saying that. But you kind of answered my question. It was about that. Are these bathrooms accessible to, you know, the handicapped community? And you kind of answered that right now. So thank you.
Yeah, ongoing question, I think, is really the answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about this model, part of why I do like it so much is that it's very adaptable because it's not requiring infrastructure change. You can kind of try it out, see if it works. If it doesn't work, there hasn't been some significant long-term investment in it. And you can try it in different neighborhoods. You can kind of try different businesses. And I think that realistically, this is the kind of thing that we'd have to be working out the kinks in. But I think it has potential to alleviate a lack for sure.
David Estrada.
Yeah, a couple comments. Well, first, I support what you're saying, Maeve. I appreciate what you're doing, and thank you. This district, I want to talk about a couple things in this district first. In Community Board 7, we did have a discussion about the installation of one of these automated pay-as-you-go toilet things on Prospect Park Southwest near 16th Street. And the absurdity of that conversation was intense and the cost was weird and it all just smelled bad, man. And I don't mean in the toilet sense. I mean, just, you know, in the bureaucratic sense. We also had in the 38th City Council District, a $2 million bathroom for Valentino Pier in Red Hook that was also a cause of scandal. So, you know, you're not talking to a geography that is insensitive to how weird it is for the city to be incapable of building public bathrooms in a way that are cost effective. I want to acknowledge there was loss of life at the Bagel Cafe in Sunset Park Bagel of someone who passed away in the restroom. So I want to really acknowledge that idea that safety and the perception of safety and access are huge questions. But there's this basic idea in the work that I do. I work for the Business Improvement District, and we talk about placemaking and, you know, making places acceptable to people. There's a kind of counterintuitive idea. Part of the difficulties that come up with public restrooms are their scarcity. And if there are many, 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 many of them, and it's just not a second thought and not a problem, in fact, some of the things that we perceive now as deep problems tend to sort themselves out. Not perfectly, but that is a very real possibility. So I really hope that something like this comes up. I think we all need to reimagine how we use public space collectively. Sometimes that's on the streets right now with restaurants and vendors and all that sort of stuff, but sometimes it's in partnership with private entities. And I can't imagine this being bad, even trivial, down on the priority list, very far. This is good for business. So, you know, tourism and visitors and families, and, you know, I know there are a lot of other higher order issues, but I wholeheartedly support what you're talking about, and I don't see any harm for us to, you know, give it a go and be supportive. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions, either from community board members or from any other folks that have joined us for the committee meeting today? I have a question myself, which is a lot of my work when we're not in the middle of the pandemic is in Manhattan, in parts of the city like Lower Manhattan, where it's really hard to find a public restroom and use one. And yet we have all of these privately owned public spaces that aren't necessarily in some cases maintained in the way that they're supposed to be. And so, you know, what I don't want to get lost in all of this is the fact that in addition to the public restrooms, so for example, I want to make sure that the public restrooms that we do have, like at the parks, in our park system, that those organizations are receiving the support they need in order to properly maintain them, versus extracting resources from those agencies or organizations in order to fund this other sort of project. So one thing is the public restrooms that we do have, how can we make them actually accessible? And I mean, I personally use Prospect Park's restrooms on a regular basis and have not had many issues with that. But I just want to make sure that that doesn't get lost in this conversation as a whole about restroom access. Secondly, so going back to the privately owned public spaces, that's another thing that I want to make sure that there's some way in the longer term, and I realize this is not your organization's problem to tackle, but that we have some accountability and enforcement of the promises that these developers make to maintain and operate public restrooms that are truly public and accessible. So that's the two things. And then the third thing is that in general, you know, I do personally kind of support testing out this initiative, but would like to ensure that if there are public funds that are going to support this, that accessible restrooms for people who use wheelchairs are accounted for, and that they make up a significant percentage of the options that are available, if not all of them, because if public funds are going towards it, technically all of them should be accessible. I realize that there are a lot of challenges to that, but perhaps that's an incentive to businesses that want to participate, that they would, you know, have an opportunity. Longer term, I'd love to see the city support small businesses in their reconfiguration of their spaces so that they can actually fund the creation of accessible restrooms in the way that's needed, or regrading certain parts of the sidewalk so that there can be ramps that go up into a lot of these spaces. So, you know, it's a complex issue, and I understand the need for just more spaces and places, but the question of accessibility is a big one. So I just want to kind of bring that into the conversation, that we don't want to disregard or ignore the already existing public restroom infrastructure that we have. We should find solutions to make it better, and perhaps this could be part of that solution. So I don't know if there's anything you'd like to speak to that, but I also see that we have one other question kind of coming in, and I'm happy to share that. But Maeve, if you have anything
Yeah,
in
I
regard
mean-
to our already existing infrastructure.
I think my one big thing that I would say is that, I mean, I support everything you said just now. And that the fundamental thing that's really big among public bathroom advocates is that there's no one answer, and that while you're pursuing one method of increasing public bathrooms, you need to pursue other ones. And so I am strongly supportive of improving the existing ones that we already have. I think for me, the thing is, can we reframe public bathrooms as an actual essential to the extent that New York City puts a bit more into it than it already does? I think that it's hard. I think that we are going to need to shift money, like within the public bathroom sphere, in that, you know, as the aforementioned $2 million public bathroom, construction costs are absurd. We need to stop trying to basically build new ones and try and find ways to use to use ones that are already there. So that is one area where I think the money could be redirected. But I also think, and I know this comes with the caveat that New York is broke, I think that public bathrooms are so fundamentally essential that we do need to find more money for them. And that means attacking it from multiple angles. So I think I agree with what you're saying. I just think we need to try a lot of things.
Yeah. And going back to the point of it being welcoming, I mean, I could see the tourism industry as being one place where perhaps there can be support for this, because it is such an issue for locals, but also tourists. So we do have a question here from Megan. And Megan, I can go ahead and read your question unless you would like to unmute yourself. Okay, I'll just read it. Would the cleaning overburden existing government staff and/or contractors, or do the restaurants receive a stipend or funds to hire their own cleaners? For example, who composes the cleaning teams?
Yes, so it's essentially all inclusive. They get a X amount of money, and then they use that how they see fit when it comes to their cleaning. I mean, because the reality too, and this is if you suddenly add a bunch of random businesses, you're not going to find that every single one suddenly has a line out the door and tons of new people coming in. You know, like this is not what one of the things that in my reading that I've kind of found is that these businesses do see an increase in foot traffic, which for a lot of the stores is actually, and the restaurants is actually a great thing. But they're not suddenly being overwhelmed by hordes of like people trying to pee, you know? So they don't actually find that their cleaning costs suddenly skyrocket beyond where it already was. Because in your average day to day, you're still not gonna, if you do it right, it's not gonna be like there's suddenly just one business in which used to have 5 people use their bathroom and now has like 90. You know, it's just kind of, it's not a great answer, but I just like, I haven't come across as a major problem there being such intense cleaning needs that it hasn't been covered by the flat fee. Like the flat fee is essentially paying you for the cleaning and for just kind of keeping an eye on it, and then a little profit on top.
And is there some kind of, well, actually we have a question here. So I'm going to have Pat Ruiz come in, either a question or a comment.
Thank you.
Oh, no.
Hi, my question has to do with security. Are there any security features in these bathrooms? If not, who's providing security? I mean, who's responsible if something happens to someone?
Yeah, the police. This is which is yes, a complication. But it basically is just a very. It's kind of just a very strict. I don't know. Essentially, the issue is you know, you'll have the cashier watching the bathroom, and if something is really going wrong, they'll call the cops. And that's kind of how this works in other cities. I know that there's a lot of problems around policing, and that in itself brings in a whole new tangle. But I think essentially, just kind of trying to clarify this, it's a very simple process to the extent that it's just the government pays a business.
I understand that. And not to interrupt you, but nothing in New York City is simple.
Oh no, I agree. I'm just saying that I don't necessarily have an answer to like. I don't think that I have a helpful answer to that question, to the extent that I think it's a challenge that is.
Thank you, Maeve. We have one more question, and I think we're going to kind of wrap up this portion of the meeting. Gerald has mentioned in the chat, have you approached any individual businesses about the program? And what was the reaction to participate? Whether it's, and just Diana's, whether it's chain restaurants or individual kind of mom and pop restaurants, or other kinds of businesses.
So I have not. So first up, in the chain versus businesses, in these other countries and areas, they generally don't use chains. Chains have, it's not worth it to the chain to actually get involved. Whereas more, they use it as a way to give more funding to local businesses, and B, local businesses are normally more interested in the increased foot traffic. So it's generally does not really involve chains. I have not personally approached any businesses though, so I don't have an answer. I would love to if anyone has anyone they think I should talk to, but that has not been an angle that we've taken so far.
And just a final question, if you were to kind of test this out in a neighborhood, where are you thinking you might want to, do you know yet where that would be, or you haven't yet determined that? Okay.
No, definitely I would want it to not be Manhattan below 125th Street. I would want it to be someplace that is not covered in Starbucks in the aforementioned things. But I mean, what I'd love to see honestly is like multiple small pilot programs, you know, like a few little clusters, as opposed to just like one neighborhood, because as we know, no area of New York is representative of the whole city. But that's honestly pretty far beyond where I'm at right now.
Okay, I'm going to take one last question, then we're going to, as a committee, vote on providing a general letter of support. So, Pat?
Yeah, I was curious about, did you give any thought to a location in the Community Board 7 district for this?
I don't think that I have the skills to do so, to the extent that it is going to come through the businesses, and I don't know that. So I mean, I could just pull up a random business on Google Maps, but like I don't think I know it well enough. You know, I would love if you guys had any ideas of what you thought was.
I would imagine private businesses would apply to get the city's subsidy to provide
Well,
this.
there would definitely be some degree of outreach at the very beginning from the government in terms of like being like, hey, like reaching out to various businesses and asking. But yeah, it would essentially be businesses choose to be in it, and so that's kind of a self-selection system.
Are you familiar with Sunset Park?
I lived in Crown Heights, so I'm familiar to the extent that I've kind of sort of been around. But no, I don't. I present to a lot of community boards, and I honestly don't know the business landscape well enough in Community Board 7 area to.
Pat, this isn't a specific plan for our community or any specific community. It's a general plan.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. And I would love to get to know your area better, by the way.
I just want to say that if the city did decide to come up with a pilot program, obviously they would set some parameters, which would include certain things like it would have to be cleaned X number of times a day. Businesses couldn't be, let next door to each other. They'd probably have to be X number apart. They might need to be 100% accessible. The city would set parameters. This is more of a general concept, if I'm correct.
Yeah, exactly. And frankly, I'm a college student. I'm not truly a great expert on anything. I'm someone with a lot of enthusiasm, but if we can bring this far enough to get to that stage, I will be ecstatic, and I will hope that there is someone wiser than me to assist with those choices.
It's refreshing to see a young face present to this board. So thank you so very much. Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you for having me.
And it's an important issue and something that we've all encountered. So we're grateful for you coming and sharing this concept and idea. Julio?
Hi, sorry. I just wanted to, I don't know if we were ready to for the letter of support. I just wanted to echo I thought this was incredibly informative, and I also wanted to support. I just wanted to issue. I'm not sure like what kind of like enforcement would look like, but I just wanted to name that, seeing as I work very intimately closely with the Department of Health and Mental Health for after school programs, I just want to name that any kind of program or pilot program, just want to make sure we're not like burdening businesses in any kind of like licensing or in any kind of like credential. And I just want to make sure we're not adding like too many layers of burden. So I'm not sure if that should go in like the letter of support or in any kind of recommendation, but I just want to make sure that we're naming that, particularly given what's going on. I don't know if that's here or if that's whether when it goes into a pilot program at the city council, if that's later on in advocacy. I just want to make sure that that's stated.
Yeah, so I do think we are ready to sort of move into a vote and we can try this unanimously, but would anyone like to make a motion to offer a general letter of support for this initiative and for piloting this concept? We can include some of the things that we would like to see, including assurance that accessible restrooms will be made a priority, that this project will not provide kind of result in an undue burden on small businesses, that the intent is not to do that, as well as mindfulness of our already existing, making sure that already existing public restroom facilities that we're not sort of pulling resources from that sort of budget. Is there any
motion?
Okay, so
Second.
Pat made the motion and David seconded. All right, and
the motion is quote what she said.
Yes. Okay, are there any, I guess now we're in discussion, right? Or no?
Correct.
Are we voting?
Correct, we're in discussion.
Okay, discussion. So are there any amendments?
Two hands up, Cynthia.
Okay, Cynthia.
Going to what Julio just mentioned in terms of bringing burdens to these businesses and public-private, ventures. I wanted to ask Maeve, does this in these other places where this has happened, has there been an insurance burden on these? And is like, because most businesses have insurance, liability insurance if somebody falls, but David brought up the fact that somebody died in Sunset Bagel's bathroom and stuff like that. Like, how does that affect the insurance of the business? Do you have any information on that?
So sorry, point of order. This is there something, Cynthia, about the motion we can talk about?
I can just type in the chat too.
Insurance, but is there something about insurance that we should include in the motion?
I think so. I think that if they're going to endorse this project on a citywide level, that part of the reimbursement fee or whatever it is that they give to these people, that it would include something that would help them with their insurance.
Okay, so we'll include
Please call that a friendly amendment to include in the framework of burdens on small businesses, considerations about cost, preference for ADA, liability. It's a sequence of things, but that's a perfectly good point to raise. And I think it doesn't change the theme of the motion.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, and Gladys Bruno, do you have Any amendments?
Yeah, can we add to that something that has to do with security besides just calling the police?
So we can, would it be acceptable to you if we include security concerns? Because we're going to have a general letter of support that'll say, but bearing in mind these issues that need to be kind of resolved.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right,
Thank-
so we've added security. Any other amendments? Okay, with, in terms of the next step, I'm going to see if we can do this by unanimous consent. Is there anyone opposed to the motion? Okay, so with no opposition to the motion passes unanimously.
Correct.
Thank you.
Excellent parliamentary procedure, Cindy.
I'm trying, you know, getting there.
Thank you guys so much. I don't know if I'm even allowed to speak, but thank you.
Thank you, Maeve. We really appreciate your thoughtfulness and time. And I see that there are some questions about handouts. Maeve, would you be able to send us a PDF of your presentation so that we can distribute that?
Yes, but can I send that to you via email?
Yes.
And
Okay.
it's also on our Facebook page now. We just webcast live, so you can watch the presentation on Facebook. You can watch the whole meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll turn it into a PDF and I'll email it to you, and then.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I don't want to keep people much longer since we've already gone about an hour with this meeting. But I do want to make sure that we get to the second item on the agenda, which is basically, we'd just like to hear what kind of issues you'd like to see the Ability and Access Committee addressing as they apply to CB7 right now, and as we look to the next year. So please feel free to raise your hand if you would like to share sort of issues that you see that are pressing. And again, we're going to go with a 3-minute limit. And if I can ask Natasha or Jeremy to hold us to that 3 minutes, we'd appreciate that. So Karen Rolnick, if you, I see your hand up first, and after Karen, David Estrada.
Maybe Julia would have more information on this than me, but now that we're in this pandemic and so many school children are using home facilities, home computers and everything like that for learning, I want to make sure that those who are developmentally challenged are getting what they need. I know that some of those are having full-time learning in schools or something, but I just want to make sure that the pandemic isn't impacting the way those children learn.
Thank you, Karen. So perhaps a joint meeting with the Education Committee to look at issues around special education and how we can better support families. I have up next David Estrada, followed by Gladys Bruno. And if anyone else would like to speak, including community members, not just board members, please feel free to raise your hand.
Just a here, and as a parent, here, and bravo to that last point. I want to echo that. Our area does have 2 District 75 schools, and a lot of kids on IEPs and folks with special learning abilities, special needs. I just wanted to mention, you asked for call for things that this committee could consider, and we have a good problem in Sunset Park. So with 2 chocolate kisses, okay? Sunset Park has a good problem. Central Business District of Manhattan is like a ghost town, but the borough neighborhoods in our commercial strips are thronged with people, frankly, because a lot of people who would normally be going to work are staying home. Fifth Avenue in particular is very crowded. There's something called Clear Path in New York City for an 8-foot clearance that would allow normal passage of wheelchairs and strollers and shopping little carts and just people passing by with enough social distance. And I think, I don't want to dig into the entire topic of stoop lines and vegetable markets and street vendors and all that stuff. But I think there is a basic ethic and standard for allowing enough room on sidewalks for people to pass safely. And if we could get into that conversation from a public health and safety lens, rather than a, you're taking my space kind of lens, I think I'd really like to support this committee, making observations in the district and coming back with recommendations that might be good, solutions everyone can share. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And that's an important issue, right? Because we all share these public spaces. And I think part of that effort should also include engaging people with disabilities and from the disability advocacy community so that we're getting that direct input in challenges that people face with navigating public space. So thank you, David. And I will put that on the list as something to follow up on and address. So thank you. Gladys?
Yes, I'm muted. Yeah, I wanted to ask a question. I noticed that like in a lot of the corners, they're making the ramp so that you can go up, with carriages and all that. Are they gonna do that? Do we know, to every corner in this neighborhood? Because I kind of noticed that they did one street and one they didn't, and one they did, like that. So I wanted to know if that, if we can do anything about that. And also, I noticed in the last snowstorm that we had, I don't know if it was in someone individually that did it, but they took the snow from those corners also out so that you can go through there. So I don't know if that had anything to do with, with us, with the city. That was a great idea to do that, because when in the past, when I helped a lot of people, try to climb over the mountain of snow. And this time when I noticed they did that, people that I saw were trying to go over the snow. I said, no, go through here. They made a path. And that worked very well for when it snows. That's something that should always happen. Always clear those corners so that at least you have that corner, every corner to cross. And that's what I wanted to say.
Absolutely, Gladys, thank you. And David has a response to that that would be helpful. And then Natasha as well.
Yeah, quick. Just the sanitation department does hire seasonal snow removal folks, and the Sunset Park bid, my business improvement district group does have someone out. It's few hands, but it does help a bit. And business owners are primarily responsible. But we have a lot of vacancies. So for that point, we need to think about what happens on a block when that roll door is never going to come up on that store for another 6 months. And nobody's clearing that icy sheen, even in the middle of the block, much less the corners. Number two, on the corners, I asked the same question because I'm like, why are you doing it here and not there? And why is it up here? And DOT says, I take them at their word. They're nice people, not always perfect. They say, they want to do every corner in the city, period. But they will prioritize corners where there has been an incident or a complaint or somehow it came to the top of the list. They use private contractors to do this work. We recently had one installed in 50, 54, 55, 6, somewhere up in the 50s. And you'll see some down in the 40s. So what's happening is they're getting to ones that seem to have floated to the top for one reason or another. But they propose that eventually they will do all the corners with this new treatment with the textured ramp that's easier for the corners. It seems a little like an imperfect answer. But they sounded sincere.
And if I could just add in, it often seems the contractors work very haphazardly, skipping streets, skipping particular corners. They are supposed to come back to them, but when you see them miss one, get in touch with me and we'll get in touch with DOT.
Okay, good.
And especially if you see contractors abandon construction materials or debris or sawhorses. A lot of these private contractors, they hit the job and they run, and their other crew never comes up and picks up all these things that are a trip hazard. So that's another thing to report.
Okay. Thank you.
So thank you, David. Natasha, did you want to share something?
Oh, just relating to the snow cleanup. When it's a significant snow event, Department of Sanitation will hire. They usually wait till it's a significant snow event. So they put the word out that they need additional snow laborers, is what it's called. And then you would go down to your local sanitation garage, show your photo ID, and they concentrate on areas like the bus stops and the pedestrian ramps when it's a significant snow event. So that's where I guess extra help comes in with sanitation. They hire,
And
snow laborers.
And every year we are actually on them about cleaning the snow and ice off of the ramps
Yes.
over the 4th Avenue medians. Those are
Yes.
often not cleared. They're often very sensitive sites along 4th Avenue. And people often have to go into the intersection to get around those.
Yes.
Yeah, and I want to commend the board staff for that. And also just remind everyone that if they do see that there is an area where there should be a curb cut and there isn't, to report that to the board staff, because that needs to be repaired and remedied as soon as possible. So we have up next is Nick Azadian and then Cynthia Gonzalez.
Mine are very, very quick. They're actually tied into David's points. David, in the case that a business is vacant, at least on the first floor retail, is the responsibility for the snow cleanup not then the responsibility of the building owner?
It is.
Okay, so then,
Ultimately, it's the responsibility of the building owner. And remember, in Sunset Park, or at least I'm thinking from a Fifth Avenue perspective, CB7 is much larger, but on a mixed-use retail and residential corridor, but for small-scale retail that doesn't have superintendents on site, it becomes very complicated. If the store is vacant, it becomes very complicated about who's going to actually do it. The building is responsible if someone's there to write a ticket. But my just fear is falling down before that happens. So it used to be I was afraid of other people falling down. Now I'm afraid I'm going to fall down. So yeah, the building owner is ultimately responsible. A lot of our building owners are themselves elderly or longtime Sunset Park folks, but not necessarily living nearby. So that becomes a tough question about who's gonna handle these gaps.
I guess the
especially
second,
because they're in financial distress as well.
right. I guess the second question then is, this goes back to the curb cuts. Let's say that we wanted to arbitrarily make some complaints for a certain section of Sunset Park, let's say from 40th Street to 60th Street or from 30th Street to 50th Street. How would one go about doing that as to facilitate the repair and or construction of the proper ramps sooner?
If you pick spots that have trouble conditions, broken curbs, sunken corner water grates, just, generally bad setup. It's not hard to find a corner on Fifth Avenue and elsewhere in the neighborhood that has, bad street and curb conditions. That's a perfectly legitimate 311 complaint. I'm just not sure about a complaint that is basically framed as a request for a curb cut. I'd have to, let's you and I check on that.
You would basically submit a fictitious complaint for whichever one's in between that block distance that you need replaced.
Well, yeah, so.
Okay, that was it.
So I think it's clear that we will definitely make a priority of following up on paths of travel, barrier removal, for public spaces, sidewalks, that sort of thing.
Cynthia, we could ask DOT to come in and give us an update on the curb cut program.
Oh, that sounds great. Okay. All right. And Cynthia Gonzalez, so you have something you'd like to share, a priority?
No, my issue was addressed. Thank you.
And then I would like to bring something up, and perhaps Melissa Del Valle Ortiz would also like, she and I have discussed this, but the need for, we've had a lot of proposals in the district for rezoning properties to build MIH housing and affordable housing, as well as just the need for more affordable housing, but we haven't taken a granular look at accessible housing. And even though there are some accessibility requirements that are included in MIH, we'd like to take a deeper dive with the Housing Committee or at least I would, to take a look at sort of what kinds of options are available to residents in the district who have disabilities and have particular needs when it comes to housing. And how does that sort of connect with the priorities that we make as a board for affordable housing and asks that we may have for future kind of zoning requests. So that I think we'll schedule a separate meeting in conjunction with the Housing Committee. Is there anyone else that would like to share any other kind of priorities? I have right now a joint meeting with the Education Committee. This presentation for the Curb Cut program as a leaping off point for the discussion of paths of travel, public spaces, as well as the housing issue. And I would say last but not least, communication access during this time period, which continues to be a challenge that I personally have been watching with the mask wearing, which I think we're going to have to continue to do this, and making sure that public meetings have the accessibility that's there so that people can fully participate. And so doesn't necessarily warrant a meeting, but something to monitor as we look to the future. Is there anybody else that would like to speak? I see Melissa has put many ideas and links into the chat. So Melissa, if you would like to share anything, you're more than welcome to join us.
Hola mi gente. Hi everybody. So yes, I kind of try to just drop in some of the corresponding content to the conversation, and I'm sorry I came late. I had another thing, but yeah, I'm just finding now that there's a survey. So if everybody, well, you can see how they actually picked the curb cuts were based on a survey that they did. And today there was a meeting on the calendar, which we missed, specifically to talk about curb cuts. So maybe we can follow up with them on that. With respect to the housing, the conversation that I presented to Cindy was specifically because Section 8 housing here in Sunset Park recently received some money to go through some renovations, which required and mandated them by the federal government to incorporate accessibility features, which included a ramp, or making improvements to the ramp, installing a lift, improving the elevator, moving tenants to accessible units as required. So those were really, really great opportunities, and thought that some of the measures that they took could also be incorporated into some of these rent stabilized developments, and also play into Project Voucher Section 8, which is separate from Project Base Section 8. So there's a website that's called goalsection8.com. So I'm gonna just drop here. There you go. It's called goalsection8.com. And what they do is they let people know which units landlords have registered and are already pre-qualified to accept a voucher. So the important part behind that is that previous to the Congresswoman's input, they did not specify whether or not a unit was accessible. So there's this, and this is on a national platform. So that's also going to be coming down the pipeline. I think that's something that's important that we measure, that we put out into the community, that they can go to www.goalsection8.com to actually now see where persons with disabilities can use their voucher. And what it's going to actually manifest, unfortunately, is that there are no accessible units currently available by use with a voucher. So that can really start to, grease the wheel to making and mandating that developments do this. And I'm actually also finding a lot of veterans having this concern. Sorry, Sorry to have taken you all the way around the block, but that's what I wanted to put on the table for tonight.
No, thank you for doing so. And I'm sure there'll be more to discuss in the meeting that we have with the Housing Committee. Karen dropped into the chat the program that New York City has for homeowners that have individuals who have disabilities where they need adaptations done to their homes. They can apply for support to do that. And we heard about that from MOPD at a presentation a couple of years ago, but I think that's also an interesting reference point. So we're going to wrap up the meeting at this point, but I'd like to thank everyone. I'll be following up with the minutes from this meeting and getting some of these follow-up meetings on the calendar for the next few months. Thank you so much for your time this evening. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. And do we have to motion? Someone want a motion to end the meeting?
So moved.
We've never done that for committees.
Okay. Doing my best. Okay, see you guys. Have a good night.
Bye, good night.
Good night.
Night.
Good night.
Take care. Jeremy, can I ask you to save the, do you get a recording of the chat, or do you have a, not a recording, but does the chat get saved on the back end?
I believe so. I believe it has to upload though.
Okay, great.
That
Okay, great.
takes an hour and a half. It was an hour and a half meeting. That takes an hour and a half.
No worries. Okay, thanks so much.
No problem.
Good night.
Bye-bye.